The noise of war and the quiet signal. The fog that rolled across the French countryside that morning was thick enough to soften even the harshest outlines of war. It clung to the hedgerows like a heavy blanket, muting the sounds of distant artillery and creating an eerie calm before the day's fighting.
Lieutenant David Mercer stood beside his Sherman tank, olive dawn, running his hand along the cold steel of its hull. Despite months of combat experience, he still felt the weight of every dawn like an unanswered question. The tank's engine was idle for now, the crew finishing last-minute checks before the column's scheduled advance. But inside the turret, hidden from the mud and smoke and chaos of battle, was the machine Mercer trusted above almost anything, the FM radio set. A compact grey metal box bolted behind the gunner's seat, its tubes and circuits glowing faintly when powered. To an untrained eye, it looked unremarkable. To Mercer, it was the most revolutionary piece of technology on the battlefield. Years earlier, when he first trained with AM radios, communication had felt like a constant uphill struggle. Every burst of engine noise filled the channel with static. Every crack of a rifle echoed through the headset. Even weather could disrupt the signal so badly that entire messages dissolved into incomprehensible bursts of sound. Tanks became isolated steel coffins, relying more on instinct and guesswork than strategy. Orders were lost, positions became confused, and men died from misunderstandings. But the FM radio was different. Its frequency modulation filtered out background noise with remarkable precision. Even the roar of a tank column could fade into a distant hum while the commander's voice remained crystal clear. For the first time, Mercer felt like the tank was part of a larger organism, linked through invisible, dependable waves to dozens of other machines rolling across the battlefield. He climbed onto the hull, boots slipping slightly on the dew-soaked metal, then swung himself down into the turret. Inside, the crew moved around him with routine familiarity. Driver Mallory checked the controls. Loader Hughes rearranged shells in the rack, humming quietly. Gunner Holtz sat hunched forward, cleaning the scope lens with a piece of cloth. Mercer reached for his headset, connecting the cable to the radio. The moment he placed the padded ear cups over his head, the world narrowed to a soft hiss of static, clean, steady, reassuring. A calm voice soon broke through. Eagle led to Sunray Group, check in. The sound was so clear that Mercer could almost picture Captain Reeves leaning over his own radio set miles away. No distortion, no interference, just pure communication cutting through the thick Normandy fog. Olive Dawn, standing by, Mercer replied, pressing the transmit key. One by one, dozens of tank commanders responded. Their voices filled the channel in an orderly sequence, forming a chain of information and readiness. It was moments like this that reminded Mercer how modern warfare had become. The Sherman tank did not dominate the battlefield through armour or weaponry. German design surpassed it in both categories. But the Sherman fought as part of a synchronized system, a network brought to life by the very radio Mercer wore on his head. Across the fields, German tank crews prepared as well, though their experience was drastically different. Many Panzer III and IV units had only one functional radio per platoon. The other tanks were expected to follow visual cues, flags, hand signals, or prearranged manoeuvres. In open environments, this system worked reasonably well, but in Normandy's hedgerows, where visibility shrank to mere meters and smoke filled the air, these limitations could be fatal. German commanders often struggled to relay changes during battle. Tanks advanced blind to sudden threats. Ambushes became catastrophic. Retreats turned into confusion. Entire armoured units lost cohesion because their radios crackled uncontrollably under the pressure of engine noise and gunfire. Most American troops didn't fully realize how significant their advantage was. To them, the clarity of FM was simply how radios were supposed to work. Few understood how far ahead the technology truly was, or how deeply it shaped combat outcomes. "Form up in 5, Mercer told his crew after Reeves's final instructions ended. "We're moving towards St. Clair Ridge. Expect heavy resistance." Mallory turned in his seat. "Any air support?" "Not today. It's just us." Hughes tightened his straps. "Guess we'll have to make do with the little grey magic box." Mercer smirked at that. Wouldn't go calling it magic, just engineering. Holtz tapped the radio lightly. "Whatever it is, it sure beats guessing what the captain is yelling." Outside, the fog thinned as the sun climbed higher, revealing shapes of other Shermans forming into columns. Their engines rumbled to life, shaking the ground beneath them. Birds fled from the treetops, scattering across the sky. The smell of diesel mixed with the earthy scent of damp soil and distant smoke. "All right," Mercer said. "Headsets on. This is going to be tight." As the tanks rolled forward, the FM radio came alive again. All units, maintain spacing. Watch for anti-tank nests. Do not break formation unless ordered. The voice in Mercer's ears felt like an anchor, something stable in a world of speed and noise and fire. The column moved with almost unnatural coordination for such heavy machines, each tank adjusting slightly to match the commands coming through the radio. German observers, hidden among the hedgerows, watched with unease. The enemy armour advanced not as scattered machines, but as a unified wall of moving steel. Even before firing began, the psychological impact was profound. Mercer knew that today's battle would be brutal. The Germans were experienced, well-trained, and defended by terrain that favoured them. But he also knew something else. His tank would not be alone, not even for a second. The radio crackled again softly. Sunray Group, prepare to engage. Mercer's heart beat faster, though his voice remained steady. Crew ready? Holtz loaded the first shell. Ready? Mallory gripped the controls. Ready? Hughes sat poised at his station. Let's do it. Mercer placed his hand on the transmitter. Olive Dawn, ready. The column surged forward, engines roaring. But inside Mercer's headset, the command voice came through as calm as morning wind. Advance. And the Sherman tanks obeyed. The first German shell landed somewhere to the left of the column, throwing a geyser of earth into the air. Mercer barely flinched. The impact was distant enough, and more importantly, the radio remained perfectly clear. No static, no interference. Just the controlled voices of commanders threading through the chaos like steady lines drawn on a map. Sunray led to all tanks, enemy anti-tank positions confirmed along hedgerow C. Adjust formation, right flank, push forward 50 yards. The commands were crisp, immediate, and precise. In another army, such coordination would have taken minutes, if it reached the units at all. But now, each Sherman in Mercer's column shifted seamlessly, pivoting around the new order like pieces on a chessboard. Mallory eased the tank to the right, treads grinding through mud. Looks like they're already awake out here. Holtz peered through the gun sight. German 75mm somewhere ahead. Haven't spotted it yet. Mercer pressed his headset tighter. Sunray led Olive Dawn, requesting guidance on anti-tank nest location. The reply came instantly. Olive Dawn, fire team on your 2 o'clock behind second hedgerow. They're dug in deep. Mercer didn't need more than that. Holtz, adjust. 2 o'clock. Hughes, prepare AP. Loading armour piercing. Hughes slid a shell into the breach, the metallic click echoing inside the turret. Holtz found the spot moments later. A faint glint. A shadow of steel behind foliage. Got them. Fire. The Sherman recoiled as the cannon thundered, the sound bouncing through the narrow hedgerows. Smoke puffed from the barrel. A heartbeat later, the enemy nest erupted in flames, the anti-tank gun flipping back from the force. Hit confirmed, Holtz said, pulling the scope back. But Mercer wasn't celebrating. The Germans were methodical fighters. If one gun opened fire, others wouldn't be far behind. And he was right. Radio chatter surged. Sunray 3 under heavy fire. German armour sighted. Panzer IVs approaching from the east. Lead to all units. Brace for armoured engagement. Mallory cursed under his breath. They're hitting us early today. Hughes wiped sweat from his brow. Guess they didn't like breakfast. But Mercer was focused. He leaned close to the radio. Sunray led, Olive Dawn requesting armour positions. The response came without hesitation. Panzer Group advancing along ridgeline. They're using high ground, attempting flanking manoeuvre. All units pivot south and prepare to intercept. And just like that, a manoeuvre that would have taken German forces 10 to 15 minutes to communicate was executed by the Shermans in less than 10 seconds. Mallory shifted gears, the tank jolting as it turned sharply. The column behind Mercer mirrored the move with uncanny precision. Tank warfare wasn't just about firepower, it was about shaping the battle faster than the enemy could react. On the German side of the ridge, however, things looked different. Oberfeldwebel Karl Brenner, commander of a Panzer IV, shouted orders to his platoon. Only his tank had a functioning radio. The others waited for hand signals. Smoke hung thick over the ridge, obscuring vision, and when the Shermans shifted formation, the German platoon didn't realise it until it was too late. Brenner waved his flags frantically from the turret, but the fog swallowed his signals. His wing tanks hesitated, guessing his intent. One moved left, another stayed still. The formation broke apart not from fear but from uncertainty, a silent killer in armoured warfare. Meanwhile, Mercer's headset buzzed. Olive Dawn, your leading right flank. Panzer Group estimated at 6 units. Engage at will. Copy. The ridge came into view, a slope scarred by artillery craters and smoke, and there silhouettes emerged, German tanks, dark shapes crawling across the high ground like armoured beasts. Holt steadied his scope. I see three panzers. They're lining up, Hughes murmured. Mercer took a breath. Holt's range. 600 yards. They've got the height advantage. Mallory snorted. Always do. Mercer keyed the mic. Sunray lead requesting elevation adjustments. Enemy using ridge. The reply, understood. All units focus fire on forward panzer. Right flank suppress and advance. The speed of the response was almost unnatural. The Shermans moved like synchronized limbs, 3 tanks opening fire at once, the blasts shaking the ground. Holtz fired again, the shell hitting the forward panzer's turret ring. Smoke poured from the impact point, though the German tank still crawled forward. They're tougher than they look, Hughes muttered. Stay on them, Mercer said. German rounds began falling around them, kicking up dirt and rocks. One shell whistled so close to Olive Dawn that Mercer felt the air displacement brush his cheek. Mallory, keep moving, don't give them a fixed target. Doing my best, Lieutenant. The radio erupted again. Left flank pushing them off the ridge. Direct hit on Panzer II. Keep pressure, they're breaking. The tide was shifting. The coordinated assault, made possible only by the FM radios, began overwhelming the Germans. Brenner's platoon, unable to realign quickly enough, found itself exposed. One wing tank misinterpreted his order and turned too far left, presenting its side armour. A trio of Sherman shells struck it almost simultaneously, erupting it into flames. Inside the Sherman, Hughes let out a shaky breath. Christ, that could have been us. Mercer nodded grimly. That's why we stay together, and why we keep listening. Holtz fired again, striking another panzer in the tracks. The German tank lurched, immobilized. Smoke billowed from its engine compartment. The radio crackled again, calm, direct, guiding. All units, push forward. Enemy armour is withdrawing. Mercer felt tension ease from his shoulders. Mallory throttled forward, navigating around debris. The German tanks were retreating now, their formation shattered, their commander unable to issue orders fast enough to counter the coordinated Sherman assault. Holtz lowered his binoculars. They're falling back. We've got them. Mercer exhaled, finally allowing himself a moment to breathe. But beneath that relief lay a simple truth. Today's outcome had not been decided by armour thickness or gun calibre. It had been decided by communication, by voices carried on clean frequencies, by the quiet signal inside every Sherman, and the enemy still didn't fully understand it. The winter of 1529 settled over the Danube like a heavy, iron curtain, weighing down every village and every road with a cold that seemed older than time. For Martin Keller, the sense of unease that had begun months earlier during the Ottoman siege of Vienna had not faded. Though the armies had withdrawn, leaving behind broken siege towers and muddy earthenworks, the fear that had haunted Europe lingered in the minds of its people as stubbornly as the frost that clung to every rooftop. In the early days of January, Emperor Charles V requested a comprehensive report from his ministers, an honest account of not only the damage from the siege, but also the hidden fractures spreading quietly through his realm. Martin, now attached to a small imperial delegation, travelled through the Austrian countryside to collect testimonies from local officials, priests, merchants and common soldiers. Though he had expected simple statements of loss, ruined fields, stolen livestock, burned farmhouses, he quickly realised that what lay beneath the surface told a deeper and more unsettling story. Near the town of Krems, he met a group of farmers gathered in the ruins of a collapsed barn. They spoke quietly at first, wary of imperial scribes, but slowly their words grew more candid. They described not only the terror of the siege, but the months of famine that had preceded it, when strange weather had ruined the crops, when the summer had been cold and the rains relentless. Many believed the strange climate was a sign of coming judgment. Others whispered darker rumours that certain nobles had hoarded grain, manipulating its scarcity for profit, letting entire villages starve while their own granaries remained full. Martin wrote every word down, feeling the tension between duty and conscience tighten around him like a rope. If he recorded these accusations truthfully, they would anger powerful men. If he softened them, he would be complicit in a lie that stretched across the empire like a long shadow. In the evenings, as he warmed his hands over small tavern fires, he spoke with soldiers returning from the front. Their accounts were even more troubling. Tales of mercenaries left unpaid, of units that had deserted entire border posts, of commanders who had profited from military contracts while their men marched barefoot and starving. Several soldiers insisted that if the Ottoman army had returned just a few weeks later, Vienna might have fallen easily, not because of the strength of the enemy, but because of the weakness within. These were the stories Martin had never expected to uncover when he first set out from Vienna. At 19 he had imagined the empire as a towering oak, strong and unshakable. Now, after months of travel, he saw that oak differently, still tall, still majestic, but riddled with insects that gnawed quietly at its core. His final destination was the monastery at Melk, perched high above the river on its golden cliffs. The journey there felt different from the rest. He sensed that whatever he would learn in its halls would shape the conclusion of his report, and perhaps his future. The monks greeted him with calm courtesy, guiding him through the cloister, where winter sunlight filtered through ancient stained glass and painted the stone floor in muted colours. Brother Matthias, the monastery archivist, welcomed him into a warm chamber filled with scrolls and ledgers. Unlike the villagers and soldiers, Matthias spoke without fear or bitterness. But what he revealed shook Martin more deeply than any accusation he had heard on the road. For months before the siege, the monastery had kept detailed climate records, unseasonal frosts, violent storms, harvest failures not just in Austria but across the German principalities, Poland, and even parts of France. Ships arriving from the Baltic carried similar reports. Rains that never ended, summers too short to ripen grain. Food shortages were not isolated. They were spreading, subtle yet relentless, like a cold tide rising across Europe. Matthias explained that the monks believed something larger was unfolding, a shift in winds and seasons that no king or emperor could control. The siege of Vienna, terrifying as it had been, was only a single event in a wider pattern of instability. If famine continued, if economic pressures deepened, if trust in the empire weakened, then even a distant threat could become catastrophic. Martin listened in silence, knowing these conclusions would not be welcomed in the imperial court. Kings preferred enemies they could see, armies on the march, flags on the horizon, but this enemy had no army, no ambassadors, no walls to besiege. It drifted in the air, in the rain, in the soil, and its advance was steady. Before leaving, Brother Matthias placed a single parchment into Martin's hands, a report summarizing the monastery's findings, along with a plea for action. The empire must prepare, the monk said, not just for war, but for hunger, for unrest, for a future that may challenge everything we understand about order and stability. That night, alone in a small guest room overlooking the frozen Danube, Martin reread the document again and again. The more he studied it, the more he understood the true weight of the task before him. His report would be more than a record of damages, it would be a warning, and warnings were dangerous things in a world ruled by pride and politics. When he finally returned to Vienna weeks later, he walked with a quiet resolve. The city was slowly rebuilding, the streets clearing of debris, the markets reopening. People laughed again, though the laughter sometimes felt thin, as if stretched over fears not yet fully spoken. In the imperial chancery, Martin assembled his final report, nearly 50 pages of testimonies, observations, and conclusions. He included the accusations of corruption, the stories of hunger, the military failures, the climate anomalies, and Brother Matthias's chilling prognosis. He wrote with honesty, even when his hands trembled. He submitted the report in early spring. Whether the emperor would read it, whether the ministers would bury it, whether it would ignite reform or be dismissed as youthful exaggeration, these were questions Martin could not answer. But as he walked out into the bright morning light, he felt something he had not felt since the siege began, a sense of purpose. The empire was changing. Europe was changing. And though he was only one man, barely grown, he had done what he could to tell the truth. Whatever storms lay ahead, whether in the skies, in the fields, or in the hearts of nations, history would remember not just kings and armies, but the quiet witnesses who dared to speak when silence would have been easier.